sisters, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I was listening to the radio this past week, and the person conducting the interview was talking to a woman who's recently published a book about insects. Not the thing you want to run out to Barnes & Noble necessarily and pick up a copy of. However, she talks about a variety of very interesting and intriguing insects around the world, and one of them that caught my attention was the one that she talked about here called the emerald cockroach wasp. It is a native of Africa, Asia, Pacific Islands, and it gets its name, as you can tell from it, because of what it does with cockroaches in terms of using the cockroach as a host for the birth of its offspring. As the lady gets into the story, what the emerald cockroach wasp does to create more emerald cockroach wasps is pretty gruesome. And so I will spare you the gory details, except for this. It's interesting that how the emerald cockroach wasp ends up getting the cockroach to do what it wants to do is quite fascinating. What it does is it will sting the roach in a very specific spot in the brain. And what that does then is it allows the wasp to literally take one of the antennae from the cockroach and lead it to where the wasp wants it to go, much like a dog on a leash. What scientists have been able to figure out is that the wasp actually stings a very specific part of the roach's brain which controls its escape reflex. And so what the wasp is really doing is it is turning off the desire of the cockroach to try and flee. And so once the wasp stings the roach goes, sure, I'll go wherever you want me to go. And literally will be led around by the antenna, much to its demise ultimately. My point is this, my friend. It's as if what happens to the roach is that its soul gets overtaken by the wasp, and the cockroach's will gets conformed to what the wasp wants to do. Again, it results in the demise of the cockroach. But the roach is willing to do it because what? Its better instinct gets shut off with that wasp sting. And so now all of a sudden, the roach will do whatever the wasp wants it to do. And so there's an interesting little tidbit for you on this subject. Which brings us, and I assure you, I will bring this full circle, which brings us to our text for this morning. And you've got a guy, you've got this group of people around Jesus, and this guy shouts out and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." For us, that maybe sounds like a strange thing for someone to shout out and ask Jesus to do, but in those days, it was not at all an odd request. Rabbis, teachers of religion, did this all the time because in that world, they functioned both as religious authorities, but also for a lot of secular matters in terms of property dividing and all that kind of stuff. So when this guy asked Jesus to do this, this is not an odd request. This is what rabbis did all the time. But what's very interesting is that Jesus doesn't just answer him in one way. He specifically says two things. Who put me as a judge, that is one who passes judgment on something, but also as an arbiter. And in that language that Jesus is saying, he very specifically is saying, who put me in a place to make a decision more generally, but very specifically to be one who divides inheritance. Teacher, I got a problem here. Guys like you normally decide this stuff. Help me out here. Tell my brother to divide up the inheritance. Who put me in a place to make a decision about this, but also to figure out how to divide the property up between the two of you guys? And Jesus says, not going to do it. What's interesting, though, is that Jesus then goes on and he says, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And the way that the Greek that Luke writes what Jesus says in, the way that it's constructed, I think, is a little bit more illustrative for what Jesus is really getting at. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions sounds a bit trite. Life is not about stuff. Well, that's true. But really what Jesus is saying in the Greek is for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. I found that fascinating simply because I think it's a little bit more nuanced. It's not so much about the stuff per se. It's about when you do have things, guess what? If you have more things than this guy does, no matter what your stuff is, whatever level of stuff you have, your life is not about that. And I think that in the way we read it in English, it comes off a little bit simplistic, and so the Greek is helpful. No matter what's always happened is, the typical way that this text gets interpreted is that Jesus is talking about greed and stuff, and how greed and stuff are to be avoided. Greed, bad. Stuff, too much of it, nah, not so good. And every place you go, anyone just about that you look at in terms of how this text gets interpreted, relegates and boils this text down to greed is bad, and stuff, be careful with it. Here's the thing though, my friend. Why does Jesus offer a parable on the back end of what he says if he's not using the parable as a way to help us understand something? And this is why the parable that Jesus tells becomes so vitally important to a deeper understanding of what Jesus is ultimately getting at here. What Jesus does is he tells the parable of this landowner, right? And this guy, you know what? He's had bumper crops. And all of a sudden he realizes, I have no place to store my crops. I got so much stuff that I don't have the room to store it. There's the guy's problem. And this is where things get really interesting. Because what is his solution to the problem? His solution is, I will tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And what ends up happening with his solution is it presents at least two problems. And the first of the problems is, you know what? Tearing down his barns is wasteful. He's already got barns, but he doesn't have enough room for his stuff. So here's the solution. Let's tear down what I've already got, and I'll build something bigger to store it all. You see what I'm saying, my friends? Why not build an outbuilding? Why not build a little shed? Go to Menards, get a shed, right? But no, I'm going to tear it all down to the foundation. I'm going to rebuild. And guys, here's the interesting thing. Think about this with me for a moment. If you've been in South Minneapolis recently, if you've been in Edina recently, there's been an interesting development in those neighborhoods in that folks are going into those old established neighborhoods and they're buying property. And what are they doing with the property? They're tearing down the houses and they're building bigger houses on those lots. And if you've been in South Minneapolis, Edina, and I say Edina because my grandma used to have a house in Edina. And someone bought her lot and tore down her house. And now there's this beautiful house. But you guys, it's shoehorned into the lot. It's a big house that's on a lot that's not the size for a house that size. And so literally, I would hate to be one of the neighbors, right? Because now all of a sudden, my beautiful view just got covered up by a whole bunch of siding. This is the same thing that's happening here, is that the solution ends up wasting a lot. Go to Menards, buy an extra building, put it up. Why tear down what you've already got? Do you see what I'm saying? But the second problem that this guy's solution in this parable presents is rationalization. You know what? I got too much stuff. So you know what I'm going to do? I will say to myself, I'm going to tear down and I'm going to rebuild. And it's that I'll say to myself part that becomes a problem. That word myself in Greek is the word psyche. And that word psyche in Greek is the exact same word that you use when you describe your soul. And so what the guy in the parable is literally saying, what Jesus is saying in the mouth of this guy who's telling the story, is that I will say to my soul, soul, we don't have enough room. We need to tear down and we need to rebuild. And this is where we really get something to chew on today. It's this rationalization. It's this self-convincing that really becomes so utterly dangerous. And I think this is what really lies at the heart of what Jesus is talking about when it comes to this young man who's asked the question and this parable that he tells in support of why he's not going to judge on this thing. It's this rationalization. It's this notion of, I'm going to say to my soul, soul, you have plenty. Kick back. Relax. Life is good. What could possibly happen? And there's where the other shoe drops, right? Because when the person in the parable says, soul, you have plenty. Relax. Take it easy. Jesus says, it's that night that God says, you fool, this very night your life, that is your psyche, your soul, will be demanded from you. And my friends, absolutely, this is a text about being very, very careful when it comes to the issue of greed and how you manage and steward the things that God has entrusted to you. But I would submit to you, my friends, that really what this is all about is fundamentally about dealing with your soul. This is fundamentally a story more than simply talking about greed and wealth. What this is a lesson in a parable about what controls your soul. And this gets back to the emerald cockroach clause. What is it, my friends, that has control of how you function? And have you had your brain rewired in such a way you'll go along and do whatever the emerald wasp wants you to do? Put that into some perspective, because it's not, I would submit to you, just about greed and wealth. This has all kinds of applications in our world today, and this being an important lesson about what controls your soul. This is more than just about the hubris of having too much stuff. It's more than about this over-exaggeration on our ability to manage ourselves in terms of greed and wealth. How's one like this? This past Thursday, our state had going into effect a law that says when you're driving now, you cannot have this thing right here in your hand at all, right? Does anybody know how long it took the State Patrol to issue the first ticket for a violation of this?
2 hours.
2 hours. 2 a.m. in the West Metro, somebody got picked. And think about this, my friends. I'm sorry for the person who got picked up, but I gotta tell you, it's 2 a.m. and you're driving, and you think that when you're looking at this, it doesn't put your entire inside of your car in a glow mode? You see what I'm saying? What did you expect? All of a sudden the State Patrol just goes, either his interior lights are on or he's on his phone. 2 a.m., 2 hours, and the first ticket was issued. Here's the point, my friends. Minnesota Department of Transportation says that 20% of all accidents every year are a result of these. Because we've got these in our hands, we've got these by our heads, we're not paying attention to the stuff around us. 20%. 1 out of 5 of every accident happens because of this. 53 deaths, 256 serious injuries every year occur because we can't put these down. Now, here's the thing. Think about it. Why can't we put these down? What have these things done to us, my friends? Thank you, John. They've bored a hole right into our brains. You guys, think about it. I normally don't carry this with me when I lead worship. You know why? Because I'm not that disciplined. Because when this thing goes off, I'm like, oh, somebody loves me. Right? We have become Pavlov's dogs. We love the ding. We love the buzz. We love the lights. We love everything. And when this thing goes off, man, is it hard to say no to. Amen? Amen. And so what ends up happening is, this thing goes off and we're like, oh, somebody needs me. And we don't realize that somebody doesn't need us going 66 miles an hour down 169. Not that I ever do that. What we need to do is we need to stop. We need to focus on them and totally focus on them. And when we're driving, we need to totally focus on driving. Which brings me to yesterday. Yesterday, Saturday, 2 full days after this law went into effect, I'm pulling out of a Caribou onto 169. And I see that the woman who's blocking my ability to get out of the parking lot, she's not aware that I'm there. And you know why? And when the light turned green, she pulls away, still going like this, and the nice guy behind her, let me in. So now I'm following her. And you know what I'm following her doing? Staying very, very far away. Because honestly, you guys, she's driving slower than the posted speed, and she's all over, literally, she's all over the place. And she had kids in her car. Ma'am, didn't you get the memo? You can't do that. Guys, here's the thing. As of this last Thursday, the law went into effect. Why? Because statistics show that we can't handle this. And there's the hubris, there's the arrogance, my friends. We sit there and we say to ourselves, yeah, but that's those other people, right? They can't multitask, but I can. I would submit to you, my friends, that the lady that I followed yesterday, she may have thought that she could still do both, but she couldn't. And so what is she being led by? What are any of us being led by when we don't do this? Another data breach happened this week. And this time, I'm sorry, I'm actually doing this for a reason. It didn't ping and I'm like, oh, something loves me. No, I'm doing this for a reason. Another data breach came out in the news this week. A bank in our country had gobs of data stolen from it. In the United States, we count privacy as one of our basic rights, and we love it, right? Here's the thing. Think about how many apps you use. Think about how many applications, how many programs you use, and all of them want to be able to use you in some way. And what's happened is this. When was the last time you actually read a terms and conditions before you allowed something to be downloaded onto your computer? Because once you open it up, you better settle in with a big cup of tea, because it's going to be a while before you get to the end of that, right? Here's what's happened. We value privacy. And what's happened, though, is our practice suggests that we aren't all that interested in privacy. Here's why. Because how often are we careless with how much data and access we offer to developers in exchange for what we think are free applications and programs? A lot of free stuff out there. But the last time I checked, that old adage of life is true. Ain't nothing in life that's free. It may be free for you to use, but what you're doing is you're exchanging something for them to be able to monetize and do what they're doing. And increasingly in our world, what it is you are exchanging your data to be able to do so, which brings me to why I even have my phone out. Just yesterday, Inc. magazine published an article by a person who was talking about a major company in our country. And what he was alarmed to find out is this company wants to be able to have access to your phone even when you are walking, when you're moving, no matter what. This is not the kind of company that's an exercise company who needs to track that kind of data. And what's happening is, ostensibly, people are letting this company do that. Why do they need that data? Guys, I'll put it a different way. More often than not, when I go someplace and I still have to fill out a paper form, which I know sounds antiquated, but it still happens. How many times do you get asked for your social security number? Why do you need my social security number? All I want to do is buy a pizza. No, that's a little bit extreme. But why is it that you need my social security number? Isn't my contact information enough? See, what's happening, my friends, is we've gotten to a point where as much as we say we value our privacy, we are exchanging our privacy in alarming rates because we want things that are free. And we're trading free. And what's happening, I would argue, is that, gosh, we're being led around, right? So it's not just greed, it's not just wealth, it's the data, it's all that kind of stuff. And by the way, lest we think that when we go out for a night in the town, and we have a beverage or two and we're an adult and we say, it's all right, I got this. No, you don't. How many of us have been affected, impacted in direct or secondary ways by the hubris, the thought that I can have a couple of drinks and I can drive home, I'm fine. No, you're not. And so here's the thing, my friends. We say oftentimes that this passage is about greed and wealth, and yet I would submit to you that it's about a lot more. What this passage fundamentally, I think, gets to because of the parable that Jesus talks about is it's a lesson about the soul-dulling sting of over-self-reliance. Don't get me wrong. Being self-confident, there's nothing wrong with that. But when self-confidence becomes inflated, overinflated, when you blind yourself and close your ears to reason out there in the world and say, don't worry about me, I got this, as you're weaving all over the place and not driving the speed limit, you don't got this. And this is where I think Jesus is getting at. This is the danger. And it's, are we going to allow ourselves to be led in that way? And are we going to yield to those kinds of things that will hurt? Or, put differently, and borrowing from a famous hymn, then sinks my soul. Soul, S-O-L, Spanish for sun, Spanish for light. We have a God who has offered us His Word, who offers us clarity as far as what He calls from us. He even went so far as to send a perfect human example into the world who not only showed us what that looks like, but then He died for us too, because we couldn't hold up our end of the deal. This is where Jesus is, I think, getting at with this. Is, are we going to sink? Are we going to have that sun, have that light be doused out because of our arrogance and our over self-reliance? Or, as Jesus said, do we offer ourselves, and that is to say, do we yield ourselves richly to our God and our Savior? As we start to live out these different things in terms of new laws, in terms of all this kind of stuff, this is fundamentally where I think Jesus is getting at with the text today. And so may we give ourselves, yield ourselves to what He wants. Let's be led by Him and not by anything else that wants to lead us to temptation or destruction. The Lord be with you.